Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode. Okay. We're not doing that music, not that music right now. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Discord Talks. It is not an episode; these are just little segments that I do inside of a bigger block of programming. And I'd like to introduce everyone to my guest today.
Howdy. ArunAnnow. It's ArunAnnow. I've been on here before, and I want to thank the Paradigm Shift. I want to thank Paradigm for having me on again to talk about, I guess, Indian and Sri Lankan politics. We can talk about both of them if you want, but uh, I guess the one thing we can focus on a little bit is Sri Lanka, but because that's the thing that I've like, that's what everyone like whenever they hear my name, they're like, "Oh, it's the guy that won't shut up about Sri Lanka." So it's like
I
I
really want to do you a service right now, and I want to say, oh my God, this is like either classist or racist or a mix of the two. I mean, nobody will take it that way, but it's like I'm really reducing what I'm saying into a joke that could. Anyway, ADHD is kicking in. Let me not do that. The only reference that I have ever really thought of in my life towards Sri Lanka was Uncharted.
Oh yeah.
See what you see what I mean? Exactly. Like
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
it is a little bit. So what I'm leading towards is I think it's a little bit like, yeah, maybe somebody should say something. I think somebody shouldn't shut up about saying things because it's like a lot of people here are very America centric, very North American, South American centric. It's like we cause problems in other places that destabilize other places that destabilize other places. It would be nice to hear, hey, that shit y'all doing, it's not good.
In this case, we can blame the British a little bit. So it was mostly like Sri Lanka was under. It was not just the British, but it was a little bit of the Dutch and the Portuguese as well. They also had a hand in Sri Lanka's. Uh, they also colonized Sri Lanka at one point. But it was mainly the British that did like the most like recent damage. But I think the problem with like when you talk about Sri Lanka, I think a lot of the problem is like if you take the British really fucked up when it came, they exacerbated already existing ethnic tensions in Sri Lanka. But I think the problem is like if you let my thing is I don't want to necessarily pin everything on Britain. I don't want to pin everything on the UK because what I'm about to describe to you is largely the fault of the fascists in the Sri Lankan government. So let's take a step back as to so I'm going to tell a little bit of a story, right? So how many of you how what have you heard about what's going on in Sri Lanka? You may have seen like the president was just thrown out, people were partying in the pool, people were working out in his gym, the president is now fleeing to Thailand. He's somewhere in Southeast Asia or whatever, right? And then you may have heard like people are struggling to put food on the table, right? And that is a real and the thing is that's still happening right now, right? So basically what's going on in Sri Lanka. So it's basically partially a mismanagement of it is if you want to think long term, the IMF has had a hand in all this, right? Sri Lanka is the first country in South Asia to liberalize its economy. And one of the things that it did is that it basically, as far as the economic damage is concerned, it actually reduced its reliance on its own crops. So for example, it reduced its own reliance on fish, right? So Sri Lanka, like what it basically did is it reduced its self-reliance on its own food, right? Because what ends up happening is like Sri Lanka exports, like I don't even remember the figure, but they export you know at least several, like they export a lot of fish and they import a lot of fish, right? When they could just as very easily be self-reliant on them, right? But basically, that we're talking about autonomy is a bad thing, don't you know? Yeah, it is. No, so basically what happened was, let's start from what's happening now. So people have been struggling to put food on the table, right? And the reason for that is the Rajapaksa, the most immediate damage is that the Rajapaksas, who were just thrown out of the Sri Lankan government, right? These guys basically really damaged the economy, right? And what they did was they basically, what the Rajapaksas did is they borrowed a lot of money. So first of all, they cut taxes across the board, right? So they slashed taxes across the board. And income tax was actually not really like a lot of the, like Sri Lanka was already, lacking in terms of revenue from taxes, right? Income taxes, right? But they slashed taxes across the board, right? That's one thing that they did wrong. Another thing that they did wrong is they borrowed a lot of money. In this case, mostly from China because they were more affiliated with China than Vikramasinghe was, right? They borrowed a lot of money from China, from Chinese banks, and they blew it all. They spent it on these white elephant projects like the Lotus Tower, and there's something called the Hambantota International Airport, right? And these are just simple examples of how they really messed up. Basically, how they mishandled the budget of Sri Lanka, right? So the stab yourself in the back and then ask a loan shark for help, right? So this is an example of like the reckless expenditures that the Sri Lankan government basically did. So Matala Rajapaksa International Airport was rated Forbes' emptiest airport. And basically what this airport was, is it was an airport built on the southern side of the country. So it was actually built in the president's hometown. It was an international airport built in a town of about 8,000 people, right? So you have basically reckless expenditures, right, that have been going on, that have been taking, that these guys, yes, the Matala Rajapaksa International Airport, this airport was built entirely on Chinese loans, right? Built on entirely loans from banks from the PRC, right? And they basically borrowed that money and they blew it. Now, there's a larger problem with neoliberalization where they've also reduced their dependency on goods, on food items as well. And they've had to import a lot of that stuff. That's a larger problem. That's a larger problem in Sri Lanka, and we'll get to that in a minute. But basically, this is the sort of stuff that exacerbated that existing issue, right? So, and if you have any questions, I don't get why any of that happened from that. Which oligarch got the bribe? The brothers got the like. It's not just the oligarchs. You got to think of it. You got to think of it as though the president got, like, they also pocketed some of the money. Like the president and by the way, the former president and the former prime minister were brothers, just for the record.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was looking for. Because you said the brothers got the bribe, and I was like, wait, no. Who are the brothers? The Luigi, the Mario brothers? Like,
no. Oh, yeah. There's a lot of nepotism, and it was most rampant during the Rajapaksa administration, but it's not limited to the Rajapaksa administration. For example, the current president, Ranil Wickremesinghe, is the nephew of a former prime minister of Sri Lanka, right? Ranasinghe he's the nephew of the former president, J.R. Jayawardena. That's the opposition leader that I'm thinking of, who is the son of a former prime minister.
So it's just like one group of people, effectively. It sounded like
it's more like 3-4 groups of people, basically. So these are examples of like how badly the Rajapaksa government fucked up in terms of the budget, right? They basically blew a lot of the money they borrowed, and they basically and again, this has also happened under the current president. Like the current president right now, Ranil Wickremesinghe, was prime minister 5 times. He's held prime minister 5 times. Just to give you an idea of how much of a circus Sri Lankan politics is, right? So basically, what? So how did these guys that took power? How did they wreck the economy? Right? How did they even begin to take power in the first place? And the reason is the guys that were just recently ousted, they're considered war heroes in Sri Lanka. They were considered war heroes in Sri Lanka because Sri Lanka had a 25-year-long civil war. And the reason for this civil war was because there was a rebel group in the Sri Lanka known as the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Iram, right? The LTTE or the Tamil Tigers is what they're known as, right? The Tamil Tigers, or you can just call them the Tigers simply, right? So you may have heard of these guys before. If I remember them, yep. You may have heard the Liberation. I put it in the Twitch chat. The Liberation Tigers of Tamil Iram, right? Now, the reason these guys formed in the first place, yes, these guys, the Vidudalai Pulikar, that's what they're called in Tamil. They're called Freedom Tigers. Basically the reason they popped about is because for decades on end, since Sri Lanka got its independence, the minority Tamil population has been persecuted. And they've been the victims. They've had to face 4 pogroms, Wolf. Actually, they've had to face 4 pogroms where they were routinely massacred, and they're the victims of a genocide, of an open genocide that happened in Sri Lanka.
Jeez.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we're getting into chat. We're diving deep into serious territory. It's still going on, by the way. Yeah, what happened is the genocide has basically moved more covertly now. You now
That's
have the Sri
never
Lankan...
something I like to hear.
Oh yeah, it's still happening, and no one gives a shit. War crimes already happened. So basically, the guys that were just ousted are massive war criminals.
Well, there goes my
India
next question. I was gonna say, sorry to interrupt you. So I was really gonna ask,
India and Sri Lanka separate countries.
What is the oh my god, okay, let me be a good host. I gotta hit him with the fire questions.
Shoot.
And I had wanted to ask you this before. Why consider okay, first I don't know, so let me ask. What is the size of Sri Lanka's population as of recorded? I could just Google it, but I wasn't planning to have this conversation.
It's in the tens of millions. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
It's that's generally the figure I'll give you. It's I think the population is 20 million. Yeah, it's 20 million or something. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Why is the method of far-right autocrats so easy to implement? It's growing in a nation here with 370 million people. It grows in the Canadian politics. It grows in Latin American politics. It grows the South African apartheid. It grows in Parliament with the whole Brexit. Why is there apathy that allows this power to grow from your perspective with what you just described? Because for somebody to say just with all their heart and chest, hey, you cared about the Uyghur Muslims, and then that wasn't a trending topic, which reminds me of the time you didn't care about black people, which reminds me of the time you were all on that we got to defeat Joseph Kony time, to that all we got to get the guys who caused 9/11 time, to all Japanese people. You see what I mean? It's there's always been
You're gonna love this. So
I that's why I asked the question. Go on.
you're gonna love this answer. Well, you're gonna love the first part of. So I'm not gonna immediately answer your question, but I'm gonna first like stun you with something. Every government is involved in this genocide. Every government. Uh, like every government has either done training with the troops, they've committed war crimes themselves, or they've given weapons to Sri Lanka. So in the case of the United States, we've done military exercises with the Sri Lankan army. In the case of Israel and China, they've both sold weapons to Sri Lanka. In the case of India, they've committed war crimes themselves in Sri Lanka. And the war crimes we're talking about, chat, trigger warning, right? We're talking about very heavy stuff, but we're talking about rapes and we're talking about like of everyone, men, women, and children, right? This is brutal stuff that we're going to be talking about. If you can't handle this discussion, please leave. I hate to like do this to your audience, but or like mute the stream or like lurk or something, but we're going to be talking about very heavy stuff here. I just want to let you guys know this is like not stuff that you like. The thing is, I've been desensitized to this stuff already.
Which will be something that we will finish this conversation on. Actually, it's funny you brought that up, but yeah, keep going.
Oh, shit, I just realized I wiped my thing with my middle finger. My bad.
It's one of those. It's all good.
No. So, but to actually answer your question, Sri Lanka, I think it's important that we talk about Sri Lanka because Sri Lanka is an example of what happens when fascism wins. Because for a very long time, the war, basically, a lot of the rhetoric that's happened. So Sri Lanka was on the process of neoliberalization for quite a while, but the ethnic tensions there were stoked by the British. And the way that happened was they would prop Tamil people into positions of power just to spite the Sinhalese. And the British would specifically antagonize the Sinhalese. So what ended up happening was two separate nationalist movements propped up in Sri Lanka. So the Tamil nationalist movements and then the Sri Lankan nationalist movements as well. What ended up happening was the Tamil, like what ended up happening was the Sri Lankan nationalists began to basically take power, right? And you have this in the form of SWRD Bandaranaike, one of the most important prime ministers in the country. He basically implemented, I believe, the Sinhala Only Act. So what that basically means, what that basically meant at the time was the Sinhalese, or the Sinhala, that Sinhala was the only official language. So there's two major, there's like multiple ethnicities on the island, of course. The dominant one is Sinhalese, right? And they can largely trace their origins to Bengal, to North India, right? Then the second largest ethnicity are what are called the Elam Tamils. Yes, the Sinhalese people, right? Those guys. So, or the Yela people, right? Bengal is East India, yeah. They can trace themselves to East India, right? Ultimately, but they've been on the island for a while. The second largest ethnicity are the Sri Lankan Tamils, right? So there are three groups of Tamil-speaking people, right? The second largest group are the native Sri Lankan Tamils, right? So these are Tamils that have been around, like, that are descendants of the Jaffna kingdom, right? The Sri Lankan Tamils, yep, the Elam Tamils, right? So these guys, which by the way, I am not an Elam Tamil, I'm not a Sri Lankan Tamil, but my ancestry is from, my family's all from India, right? I'm not at all from Sri Lanka, but the reason I talk about what's going on in Sri Lanka is because a lot of refugees from Sri Lanka enter my home state of Tamil Nadu, right? Especially the Tamil refugees, they enter my home state because again, we speak ultimately the same language and we share a culture, right? One group are the Indian Tamils. So another group of Tamils that exist on the island are called the Estate Tamils. And And the estate Tamils are basically bonded laborers that were brought over by the British to work the tea plantations. So
Okay.
their ancestry originally comes from India, right? But they've been in Sri Lanka as a result of the British basically literally importing them into Sri Lanka to work the tea plantation, right? And then the final group are the Sri Lankan Moors or the Sri Lankan Muslims, who
Mm-hmm.
are Muslims whose mother tongue are Tamils, whose mother tongue is Tamil, right? And now some of these guys identify with the Tamil label. A lot of them don't because, again, the LTTE. I'm not going to defend the LTTE. They also committed horrific war crimes.
Mm-hmm.
But what ended up happening was, and this gets so little press, which is why I talk about this so much. Um, Basically, over the course of decades, right?
Mm-hmm.
So after the British left, right? Uh, the ethnic resentment that they left there was brewing, and that spoiled over into several major pogroms that happened in the 50s, the 70s, and the 80s, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there were mass killings, there were mass rapes of Tamil men, women, and children. And obviously, in retaliation, there were some Sinhalese people that were also caught in the crossfire that were also targeted by Tamils as well, right? But the large bulk of the damage was done to the Tamils, right? And it was backed by the government, right?
Mm-hmm.
And another thing is, this is not TOS. I've showed this on stream before. Do not worry about this. So there's in the northern side. So to give you an idea of the of where people live in general, the Elam Tamils that we talked about, they live on the northern side of Sri Lanka. So they live basically on the northern and eastern coast of Sri Lanka. And the northern, basically the largest settlement in the north is a city called Jaffna, right? And Jaffna is basically the cultural capital of the Tamils of Sri Lanka. They're the cultural capital of the Elam Tamils, right? And also, they're the cultural capital. Like, to give you an idea, I have family. Like, I have a family friend who's basically half Sri Lankan. Her one of her parents is from Jaffna, like this city that we're talking about that I posted in the chat. The burning of the Jaffna library. We're going to talk about that in a second. Her dad is from India, right? Her other parent is from India, right?
Mm-hmm.
But long story short, in Jaffna, there's this public library which housed a lot of cultural artifacts, right? And this, basically, to give you an idea, there's this book called the Tirukural in Tamil literature. So Tamil is like a very old language, if you don't know. So
Thank you.
So Tamil is a very, very old language, right? And to give you an idea of the time scale that we're talking about, there are loan words in ancient Hebrew, in the Torah, I think. But there are words in biblical Hebrew that are there are words in biblical Hebrew that are loan words from Tamil. The word rice comes from Tamil, actually.
Okay. Wow. Did not know.
The word mango comes from Tamil, right? So these are this is a culture that has existed for a long time, right? So, like, to give you an idea, the earliest records of this were like 500 BC. Like, and it could potentially be older than that, right? So that's how old the time scale we're talking about here. And one of the oldest books, and there's an era called the Sangam period.
Mm-hmm.
And within this, basically, these guys wrote, like, Sangam is like slam poetry. Like, think of it like this. Like Sangams are like very like slam poetry sessions, but like they were hosted by kings. This is hosted like several thousand years ago, right? So those, like, and back in the olden days, right, back thousands of years ago, the most revered job or the revered occupation was a poet, right? If you were a poet or you were involved in some sort of literature, that's how deeply ingrained the language is into us, right? Like, the language is super important to us, right? And literature as a result, like there's a part of my own identity, part of the way I move in India that is informed partially by this literature, whether I know it or not, right? In Tamil Nadu, there are verses of this, like there are poetry verses on buses. That's how deep rooted this stuff is, right? So I just want to give you that context, right? This stuff goes back thousands of years, right? We're talking a long time scale, right? And one of the original copies of the most important book in Tamil literature, this is not like religious literature. This is completely secular, right? This is literature that Jains, Buddhists, and Hindus have all contributed to. People of different faiths contributed to this, right? One of the original copies of that book, of those palm leaf manuscriptures, right? So they, like, originally this stuff was written on palm leaves, right? And that's actually partially, even like the way the script is written, right? Just to give you an idea, right? The reason it looks the way it does, if you don't know what the language looks like, right? Where is it? If you don't know what the language looks like, this is what it looks like. The reason I'm going into so much depth about all this is to give you an understanding, is to give you, are we talking about the burning of the Jaffna Library? Oh yeah. Yep, Ruhan. Yep, we're going to be talking about the burning of the Jaffna Library in a second. Yep, we're talking about that again. Yep. Because I think this stuff needs to be talked about more, and I'll get to that. I'll get to what I wanted to say later. When I come, yeah, he wrote in Tamil, right? That the way it looks, it's all curvy, and the reason it looks all curvy and stuff is because if you actually drew straight lines on the palm leaves, you'd puncture holes in it, right? So I provide you all this context for what you're about to see. There were original copies of the most important book in Tamil literature, right? And this tells you how to live. This tells you, like, for example, verses out of that book, right? Or like, hey, go work this job and then you'll get swole. Like there's like budget fitness advice in there, right? So that it's so ingrained in part of the culture, right?
Okay.
And that video, basically what happened in 1981, the Sri Lankan cops went into the Jaffna Library where all these priceless thousands-year-old artifacts were stored, and burned the entire library down. So all those priceless artifacts that were intrinsic to the culture, that were so important, all up in smoke. It's gone. We're never getting that back again. Those priceless acts of not just Tamil history, but of human history, we're never getting that back. And the reason is, the Sri Lankan cops and the Sri Lankan fascist mobs targeted that library because it housed this history. And they wanted to commit a cultural genocide.
Ooh. Now I have to ask you, I don't have to ask you. I really don't. I'm going to anyway.
Shoot.
Why? How did things get to a point where this can be done so openly and there isn't like a vocal cry out? Because it's like we tried to keep the chapel or whatever it was, the Sistine Chapel, or like the Ark, the Noah shit, whatever. Something was burning down and everybody was like, yo, we gotta pour in donations, and it raised like $1 billion or something. What is the disconnect here? Why are we so disconnected from such a large populace? You see, now why I asked you the question about the population. Why are we so disconnected from such a large populace? Why don't we we study? All right, I'm saying this because you know me. I just got to prep everybody for it. You're going to have a paradigm moment. It's going to be very quick. I got to ask you a question.
Shoot.
Why do we learn so much about leftists say a lot, hey, pay attention to like the Nordic countries, socialist programs, like social safety nets. They always point to their countries. Why don't we ever point to other countries? Like, and we only point to Germany as a form of, hey, we beat fascism, we beat the Nazis. It's like, why don't we look and point and go, hey, that thing that we like to defeat so much is happening, like those people. And I know it could be reduced very easily to it's brown people, but like I want to go a little bit further than that, if you don't
I mean,
mind.
that was my first gut answer.
Exactly, right? Like,
I mean, but the honest truth of the matter is every country has capital interests in Sri Lanka. That's the honest truth. The reason no one has said anything about this, and the reason no one really gives, I mean, like some representatives here in the United States and some Canadian representatives have basically said, "Hey, Sri Lanka, what you're doing is really, really bad," right? And it's like a slap on the wrist. Like, like the honest reason no real action has been taken against Sri Lanka is because they don't want to upset the Sri Lankan government because there's capital interest in there, right? I mean, first of all, Sri Lanka is a massive tourist destination, right?
Talk about it.
It's like, I mean, Sri Lanka is a beautiful country. I'll never go. I'm never going to Sri Lanka because the thing is, they can tell exactly what ethnicity you are based on your last name, and my last name gives it away that I'm a Tamil. Yeah. So I'm like, yeah, nah,
I'd rather,
like, unless you know people there, they're gonna look at you with suspicion. And because I talk about this stuff, if people realize who I am, they're gonna book me and they're gonna question me.
Yeah, that's the least of what they'll do.
Yeah, that is the least of what they'll do. And the honest truth is, every country wants a piece of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is, geostrategically important. It's in the middle of the Indian Ocean. It's in the middle of the Indian Ocean trade. That's why that's why every country that's why every country wants a piece of it. India wants a piece of it. China wants a piece of it. America wants a piece of it.
Time for me to I'm sorry to interrupt you again. I do this.
Oh yeah.
I have two things. One, guys, I don't want to reduce everything that has been so very heavily explained and thoroughly explained. And no, that's not being sarcastic. That's me giving it the weight that it deserves. I know y'all not used to hosts being able to do that. Relax. But do you remember Just Cause 2? Remember how everybody was fighting over the island of Panay? And it was all about the resource that it had, and it was like, why would
you cut out for me?
Did I?
Yeah, you did for a little bit. Yeah.
And
yeah. No. I see why, because you stopped talking because
something.
Yeah.
The light changed.
Yeah.
What light did I have? What's going on? I'm scared. It got darker. Did it not get darker?
Oh no, it got darker. No, I see it on my end.
What the?
No, I see it on my end. Yeah, no,
I gotta know what turned off, what changed. I gotta know. I'm sorry. I'm in the middle of doing a show, and I'm here worried about my lights. It's just, that was scary. Like,
you know what? I take that as like the lights acknowledge the darkness and the seriousness of the topic that we're covering. You know what I mean?
Nah, real shit though. I don't know. No, my dad didn't get up and turn off or turn on any lights. This light was, I get, you know what it may have been?
What?
No, but that doesn't even make sense. It was definitely this light, I guess. Oh, okay, my light overheated. That's what it is.
Okay, I know, that makes sense.
Give me 1 second. Yes, we're doing live production changes. It's happening. Everybody be quiet. I guess I can't run this forever while it's plugged in. I gotta let it like cycle out.
Wolf of Karnataka says, I'm not Tamil, but closely related to Tamils. Yes. So Wolf is actually a Kannadiga. So Uh, basically, so there's two major like linguistic groups in India, and the reason we're mentioning India in this context is this is like Tamil is what's called a Dravidian language, right? Um, it's there are like I don't know how to describe what the language is like because it's not like the thing is North Indian languages are cognates with English, right? They have like they're related to English, they're related to Spanish, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of words that are in those languages that share words with English, right? Just because they share a common ancestor.
Right.
Whereas Tamil has borrowed those words because our native words are completely different.
Okay, keep going. Sorry.
So, so he also is a speaker of a Dravidian language called Kannada. So that's the language he speaks, which is
Okay.
a cousin of Tamil, right? So we like, I mean, these are like old languages. So it's like think of the relationships between Kannadigas and Tamils. It's like Spanish and Italian. That's kind of the way I can describe it. That's the best way I can describe it.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah, we're cousins. Let's put it that way. Um, but going back to this, you can play that video if you want. It's not TOS, I'm pretty sure, but
Oh no,
it's
I wanted
that.
to keep you talking. If you wanted to discuss the video as the main focal
No,
point,
I think
like,
I think the video is enough to shock the conscience. I think it's better that the audience sees it.
okay.
There's not much I can say that the video can't show you. So there should be parts of it, a little bit, that
every building and every monument,
like you can fast forward to basically the black and white portions.
Okay.
So like skip forward to about 151.
none more than the town's public library. When it was built, the library was one of the largest in Asia.
So that's where all the
source of
priceless
enormous
artifacts. They
pride for the
rebuilt that,
Tamil
by the way.
community.
They rebuilt the Jaffna Library, but it's a hollow image
But its
of what it used
golden
to be.
age came to an abrupt end in 1981.
1981, guys. Even though it's black and white footage, that's a stone's throw. That just happened.
At
My
the end
dad
of May,
was-
rioting broke out after the shooting
was a
of three
teenager when this
Sinhalese
happened.
police at a Tamil political rally. Tamil houses,
He was
shops
alive
and
for this
offices
stuff.
were all torched in revenge, and there were reports that police were among the rioters.
Yeah, that's what happened. They burned the entire,
Then Jaffna's
They
most
burned the
loved
entire thing
building
down.
was set alight.
all those artifacts
And
I
I was
was
able to
telling
see
you
the
about,
library going on
like
film.
showing the
So my
literature, the
feeling
long
was
literary history of the language,
that we are losing a treasure.
up in smoke.
When
It's
former
gone.
municipal
Completely
commissioner
gone.
Sivagnanam went to investigate, he says
These are not
police
just
stopped him.
artifacts
And I
for
was threatened.
Tamil history. These are artifacts of human history
Mhm.
that are gone forever.
All because of the actions
All-
of.
Yeah, the people who did this don't even realize it themselves. But that's also part of their history that's gone
Cultural
too.
treasures went up in smoke, leaving only a lasting bitterness and anger.
Yeah,
And
they burned
seeing
it all to
those
cinders.
collections in flames and realizing that the whole thing cannot be retrieved, it was terrible trauma in my mind when I was standing and looking at this. It was really a cultural genocide. The burning was a cultural genocide.
In a recent Tamil documentary,
Yeah.
Sri Lanka's former foreign minister said that
All that's
Sinhalese
gone.
also felt the
All of
library's
the-
loss.
All of those priceless artifacts.
This was not only a blow to the Tamil
Gone.
people and the Tamil
It's like he said.
intellectuals.
It's like
It was
your
a blow to the
history.
whole country.
It is a cultural genocide. It is a genocide. Yeah, your history's up in smoke.
So burning
It's gone. It's like that guy said.
was a massive cycle of
And I couldn't even imagine, like, there just being no way to rectify that. Like, the only thing you got left is your memories. The only thing you got left is whatever you were able to scrounge and, like,
Yeah,
no time for digital, like, certification, no time for, like, wartime protections. It's just a vulnerable piece that holds so much weight just gone, and like everybody is wondering what the next iPhone coming out is going to be.
It is what it is. I mean, the thing is,
What
like,
it is.
it is what it is, right? It is what it is. Like, so this is in 1981. In 1983, uh, Black July happened. So what happened in Black July was the LTTE, which we talked about, which has at this point been formed, starts attacking Sri Lankan troops.
Mhm.
Right now, in retaliation, fascist Buddhist Sri Lanka Sinhalese fascist mobs, right? So these guys, with backing from government officials, so what the government officials did is they provided voter rolls. They provided voter rolls of the locations of everyone, and what these guys did is they targeted the specifically Tamil homes. They specifically targeted the Tamil homes and Tamil-owned stores and Tamil-owned establishments, and they burnt them all the way down to the ground. And they killed the men. They killed everyone. They also sexually assaulted the men, women, and children. Hundreds, if not thousands, died during that, and that marks the beginning of the Civil War. Now the war lasts 25 years. And towards the end, we haven't even gotten to the most brutal aspects of this, just for the record. Yeah, kids like those in in 2 decades time, 2.5 decades time, some of those kids will be blown to bits by the Sri Lankan government. They'll be shelled into oblivion. So in 2009, a guy gets elected president. His name is Mahinda Rajapaksa. You may have you may have heard of that name before because I just
Yes.
mentioned his. Yep. He gets elected president. He's the former prime minister. At this point in time, he's the president. And he appoints a defense secretary, defense minister by the name of Gotabaya Rajapaksa. That was the former president. You can see where this is going, right?
Right.
So towards the end of the Civil War, there are several NGOs set up, especially in the northern parts of the country, like Kilinochchi, Jaffna, and basically the northern parts of the country are a lot more. I mean, a lot of Sri Lanka is rural, right?
Mhm.
But what ends up happening is a lot of these NGOs are set up nearby villages, right?
Mhm.
The NGOs are basically I mean, they start giving coordinates of the NGOs are problematic in their own way because they give out coordinates to everyone, and the Sri Lankan government used them to bomb villages. But what the Sri Lankan government does is they basically say, "Hey, NGOs, you better leave, otherwise your safety is not guaranteed." All the people that were working as part of the NGOs that were non-governmental organizations in Sri Lanka, they were forced to flee. And there's footage of it. There's a video up on the internet called the Sri Lanka's killing fields. I'll type it in the chat. I am not going to recommend you watch this video on stream because it is almost every other second is TOS. Yeah, it's highly TOS. I do not recommend watching that video on stream. So Sri Lanka's killing fields. So what ends up happening, it details basically what happens towards the end of the Civil War. So basically, these guys, the Rajapaksa brothers, they force out the NGOs, right? And while the NGOs were being forced out, there's footage of Tamil villagers, especially in the north, begging the NGOs not to leave because they needed witnesses to their deaths. They needed people to be there to record them being shelled to death. Because if no one was there, they were going to die. And that's exactly what happened. The NGOs left, the Sri Lanka and the Sri Lankan government led by the Rajapaksa brothers, bombed those villages promptly into oblivion. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then what ended up happening was there were these no-fire zones that were set up all across the country. And then what ended up happening, so basically these no-fire zones were set up across the country so that neither the Tigers nor the Sri Lankan government could interfere. They could, like, these were supposed to be obviously no-fire zones where no one could fire,
Mm-hmm.
right? And in these sort of no-fire zones, oh, stop playing that. Yeah. Um, in these no-fire zones, what ended up happening was uh, there were tents, there were like makeshift hospitals that were set up. And what ended up happening was there were there was like it was really brutal. The Sri Lankan government, obviously, in a very scummy move, also denied as much aid to those areas as possible. Right, so they basically blocked any humanitarian aid, as much as humanitarian aid as possible, from going into those areas, into those no fire zones. That's one thing that they did that was really that was inhumane. And then the other thing that happened was there's these makeshift hospitals that were set up, and the stories coming out of them are harrowing, to say the least. They've had to perform anesthesia. They've had to perform amputations without anesthesia
Mm-hmm.
on children with like rusty kitchen knives. Um, that's the kind of situation. That's the people died of blood loss. Those, again, those tents were what promptly happened was each and every single time these NFZs were set up, the tigers would hide in these NFZs, prompting the Sri Lankan government to bomb those NFZs, those hospitals. And again, there's footage of the Sri Lankan government uh, bombing these hospitals and bombing these tents, and people's corpses littered all over the places. I it's
Heavy.
um yeah,
And
no,
no,
it's not even the worst.
it deserves the gravity of it. I realized that and I'm just being honest with you as I'm listening to you. I realize that certain conversations that have to be had aren't being had. Like what you're telling me right now is something that is absolute news to me. And it's not like it was something that happened hundreds of years ago that led to, this, that, and the. It's like that was just like during the Reagan crack era. Like that was just that happened like the couple
Oh,
years ago.
the
Like,
stuff that I'm describing now, that happened in 2009.
yeah, a couple years ago. Just a couple years ago.
Yeah, no, and I'm not even done.
Keep going.
Um, so these NFZs were set up, right? And you have women and children getting bombed into oblivion, and you have there is just to give you an idea of the kind of um here. I just want you to pull up this Wikipedia page.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to go into detail. You don't have to go into detail as to what's happening. Like, you don't have to read any of the accounts. But I want you to look at the size of that scroll bar. It's in chat. Look at the size of that scroll bar.
Yeah, that's that's bigger than like most detailed accounts of like that's long, very very lot of resources, 245 resources. That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
By the way, look at the date. Oh, wait, you closed it, right?
Yeah.
Go back and look at the date. Look at the dates. 1958 to
2021.
exactly.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Oh gee.
Yeah. Um yeah. That's the kind of shit that happened in Sri Lanka and no one talks about this shit. And on top of that, there is I'm going to just DM you this and this is an account of a woman called Isapriya.
Okay. I am I found my way. I think I'm too deep. I think I need to go back a little bit. Um it starts with an M.
No, I just sent it to you in DM.
No, I know you what you said. I meant what I clicked on because I was looking at different
Mahinda Rajapaksa?
um it's the first letters Maro. Is this it's something like the Italian is for Moroccan's deeds?
Send me that in DMs again? I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay,
I don't know what
maybe
you're talking.
I'm maybe I'm bugging. Hold on. We gotta take the screen off real quick. Maybe I'm bugging. I'm trying to do research while I do this, and I've never done this before. Am I in the wrong area? Am I out of? That's what I said. I think I went too deep. Am I out of Sri Lanka and its involvement?
Yeah, this is not, yeah.
Okay,
This is
pulling
yeah.
back. I made it. Hey. It was a link from a link. Okay, we're back to this one. Okay, now I'm looking at what you sent me.
Yeah. I've never seen that before, yeah. Please don't read the article out loud. It's TOS, yeah. What happens to her is super gross, but basically no, I can read it. Basically what happens to Priya is she is sexually assaulted and then promptly murdered by the Sri Lankan army. That's what happens. That's what happens to her. She's a very famous newscaster and I think artist. I think she's a singer as well. Who volunteers in a hospital, gets found by the Sri Lankan army, gets accused of being part of the LTTE, gets promptly sexually assaulted by members of the Sri Lankan army, and then gets promptly murdered and thrown into a mass grave. That's what happens.
And my final question to you then would be: besides awareness, what can we do politically to help? Because most people, if they got a chance or a whiff of that story, they would immediately say things like, "We got to go in there." What can we do to help?
The sad thing is nothing. The honest truth of it is nothing. I mean, it's the thing is, what you can do is you can look online for like. Here's the thing, right?
Mhm.
I've there are some. The thing is, the situation in Sri Lanka. So what I'm describing to you is, and sorry, I didn't mean to like go into all this. Like I didn't mean to like go into all this and like like fuck up the vibes and whatnot.
Don't worry,
Um,
I'm the master of bringing it back. But that's why, and that's you know what I'm gonna eat this conversation for a little bit. I'm not even gonna give you a chance to answer that yet. I want to tell you, what I was starting to say earlier. I think that a lot of conversations that people don't want to have end up being had on a very large stage. Like, this is a TED Talk type of thing where you sit down for an hour with the person and like you go into all the things that have just been ignored and you try to guide a conversation on like, okay, so how did this happen? What is the origins of this? What are we talking about now? How can we help, etc. I realized that like I might never naturally have ever decided, yo, let me do a day on Sri Lanka. Let me do it like a day on that. Like my audience might not like that. It's too uncomfortable for them. And then here comes you. And it's like you could say, damn, I really fucked up the vibes in here. It's kind of, but it's like maybe my audience would have watched that TED talk and now they got it here in a nice, calm environment. No paywall, except for that sub money that you could be throwing at me, because I got a shell for the capitalist system. You are giving me the ability to hear firsthand not only just the events, because anybody could have just Wikipedia'd that and found their way through, but like an actual voice to it. An actual voice that's like, hey, I'm telling you these parts because that's the importance that I'm not here for the details on like the morning of. The event itself in question is happening and like we need attention to that because it's getting bad and other governments could model this. This could be where we got to point our attention to. This is where we've got to, yo, over there.
So I would love an opportunity to just finish up this story
Yeah,
because
go
we're
ahead.
not even done. We're not even done with the Civil War yet. We're almost done.
Go ahead.
But basically, so this all culminates. So all the stuff that I've talked about culminates in something called the Molivaikal massacre, and this happened in May of 2009. And basically, this is a massive operation done by the Sri Lankan government, where they basically ended the LTTE. But as a result of ending the LTTE, because they treated all Tamil civilians like they were LTTE, uh, hundreds of thousands of people died, were massacred at the hands of the Sri Lankan government. And we're talking villages, entire villages were cleaned out, so to speak. And the thing is, the guys that were put into power as a result of this were just thrown out. I just want to let that sit with your audience for a second. They were thrown out not because of the war crimes that they committed. They were elected because of the war crimes they committed. But yeah, this is the sort of thing that um but yeah, this is the and I like I probably should have thought about this before talking about it on stream because this is like you're probably never going to invite me on onto your stream after this. 'Cause I just drove away half your audience after like coming on after like talking about all this really messed up stuff.
But
But
it needs to be talked about.
yeah, that's why I've been yelling into a mic about this, hoping people would listen.
Hey, look,
And
you found me.
yeah, and I appreciate it, dude. I really appreciate it.
Of
And I found
course.
Endless, and I found Beer Bash Johnson, and I found Jason Society. I found so many people that were willing to listen to me, that were willing to listen to me. I found Gremlo. I found so many fucking people that were willing to listen to me because like the thing is like everyone that was talking about Sri Lanka never once actually talked about the stuff that happened for decades and no one gave a shit about it. And that's the thing that every time I see people talking about this stuff, right? Like CNN is talking about this stuff or MSNBC is talking about this stuff. And it's like, you guys are missing out so much. Like, like fucking TYT isn't talking about what happened in Sri Lanka. Even like the prominent leftist outlets aren't talking about like what was happening in Sri Lanka. Right? I love Hassan, but he didn't say a damn word about this as far as I know. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And like that's the most frustrating thing about this. because fucking no one else is going to talk about this stuff. And I want people to talk about this stuff. It's like, it's super frustrating to be the only guy that talks about like for example, the kind of messed up stuff that happens in India.
Yeah.
The DSA or Jacobin are not okay. No, the Jacobin has talked about it before. I'll give credit to the Jacobin. I don't know about the DSA, but I know for a fact that the Jacobin has talked about it. But the major leftist outlets, no, not a peep out of them. And that's this is where we're all supposed to be. This is all we're supposed to be. This is where we're supposed to, the leftist movement is where we're all supposed to come together to talk about this sort of thing. And I figured if the leftists are not talking about this, then all is lost. Right. And and like I said, I probably should have thought about the way I approached handling the subject before we, got into the really fucked up details of what happened in Sri Lanka.
Mm-hmm.
I probably could have approached it with a little more tact, understanding of the audience. But it's, I, you know, this stuff needs to be talked about. People need to talk about this sort of thing. People need to talk about this stuff. What is the point of people saying, hey, we need to listen to people from the third world? We need to listen to people from the fucking third world. If you don't talk about this shit, what is the point of saying what is the point of looking at things from a global perspective? What's the term that leftists love to use? Internationalism. Or I don't know what the term that leftists use for this sort of thing. Looking at things from an international perspective. What's the fucking point of it all if you're not going to talk about stuff that the Sri Lankan government has gotten away with? If you're not going to talk about, even Indian politics, right? The extent of what people know about is Modi bad. But there's never any nuance that is approached with a lot of this because not globalism, that's a different word, but no, what is the point of saying what is the point of this hollowness of I'm international. I talk about things from a international perspective. Yeah, you like certain countries that there are certain countries that you're more willing to defend. I got it. Okay, cool. But you're not actually this is a Sri Lanka, India are third world countries. What about them?
I appreciate you sharing this story. I appreciate you going through the motions, definitely. Is there any last thoughts that you'd like to add?
I that's all I mean, as far as, so basically there is a ray of hope in the sense that it seems like people in Sri Lanka are trying to come together. There is a ray of hope, but but overall, the honest truth of it is the establishment is still in power in Sri Lanka. That's the update. And a decades-long law, which is basically our Patriot Act, which has been used to lock up people, lock up dissidents. Basically, Sri Lanka is a prototype in fascism, in authoritarianism, right? And ethnic bigotry. If we do not learn from Sri Lanka, we are also doomed. It's a simple fact. If we don't learn from the third world, we don't learn from Sri Lanka, both the good and the bad, right? And a lot of it is bad here, then we're all doomed to repeat the same mistakes.
Very good. Thank you so much. And where can people find you at?
You can find me at ArunAnnow. That's ArunAnnow. You can find me on Twitch. You can find me on Twitter. No, I usually talk about South Asian politics. Usually, it isn't sometimes I'm going to be honest, sometimes it does get as harrowing as this. And but overall we try and keep things light as much as possible because there's lots of topics that we cover that are incredibly heavy, and there's it angers me deeply that this stuff still happens. And yeah, again, sorry for potentially triggering a lot of your audience. I didn't mean to do that.
It happens. I'm just happy to be one that you can trust to listen to you. I'm happy that you can trust me with that.
No, I'm happy that you had me on. I deeply appreciate it.
Got it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the second episode of the Paradigm Path, and we will see you definitely in the next one.